Hey guys, Chris from the Ultimate Recycler. I've got an old lamp here that came out of a box I just cleaned out, and I have half an hour spare, so I thought we'd run you through a little value adding exercise, bit of a repair job. This lamp is probably 1970s thereabouts. It's got a milk glass type shade on the top. It's sort of supposed to look a bit like an early oil lamp, but it's an electric lamp. It's got a glass chimney here which should lift out. It's a bit tight, but it'll get there. It's got it. It's got an old style fitting here, typical of the 70s, and it's very grubby in there. I have washed it up. It was in a box and it was filthy dirty. A little bit of a corrosion around the metal here. It was just a cheap chrome. The base looks like a marble. Could be alabaster. What's that say if we get the reflection out of the road? It looks like it is marble, made in Italy. Just pressed glass. Quite a nice decorative lamp, and it will sell fine, but I need to have the thing going. You can see the top wireframe's bent there a little bit. We'll be able to straighten that up fine. But the main issue with these lamps is that it's got a little pull cord for on-off. And someone's wrapped some fabric around there because they rub through, and usually the cords break. So we're going to do away with that. It's actually out of alignment too. You can see that the hole where the cord goes through is offset to where it's supposed to pull. Yeah, that's actually all loose. So it's not saleable how it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the cord out of it and pull this light fitting out, and we'll put a different light fitting in there. Now, because you can't put one with a switch in it, as in a normal hand operated switch, there's just no room to get your fingers in. And I don't think I've even got one, but I don't want to put another cord type one in. I'm going to put a standard light fitting, wire it up to a different cord, and here's one I saved out of a lamp I scrapped, and it's got an inline switch. So that will then make this quite an attractive little usable lamp. We won't have any more issues with a string. We'll tighten the fitting up. I'll straighten the frame. The glass is in good condition. Bit of painting on there. It's not everyone's taste in decor, but anyone that has sort of a 70s era retro style house, could even be late 60s. Sometimes these foil type stickers are more from the 60s, but it's within 10 or so years of the 70s. So we'll get to it. It won't take a lot to do, and I thought I'd just film a few of these little repair jobs to help you out. It's just basic stuff, but a lot of people haven't had experience at working on lamps, and hopefully my videos can show you that it's not that hard and maybe inspire you to repair a few, because it's much better to repair them. I'm obviously going to make better money as well, but also it saves it going to landfill. Alright, the first thing we need to do is get the thing apart. Now I'm going to feed the cord back through the hole here, and it will loop back. I might need two hands to do this, but if I get it to loop back and I can pull it back through here, when it's nice and straight, I can then twist it and undo the fitting. There's still a little bit, it's still attached a little bit, and then I'll take it out. It doesn't really matter if I snip the wires because I'm going to replace them anyway. Now the whole assembly is usually, on most lamps, is held together with a nut each end, and they kind of run a threaded pipe down through the middle. And a lot of times the glass and chrome pieces are really just all threaded onto a pipe like a set of beads, really. So now that we've got that through, I'm going to snip the cord. It'll make it easier to get it out, and we'll undo that nut there, and then it all should basically fall to pieces. If we were reusing the cord, I wouldn't have snipped it, and by looping it back through, we would have got enough twist or enough room to undo that nut. Now we should be able to get some pliers in there. Not those ones. It's always handy to have some good needle nose pliers around and get into those tight spots. There we go, that's undoing fairly easily. And a bit fiddly, but there we go. And it's not even a real nut, it's just a pressed metal thing. Anyway, I guess they save expense where they can. Now as you can see, it's just going to pull off in sections. We'll remember what order they go in. We'll give that a little bit of a clean up in the tick too, just to try and get rid of some of the rust. The glass is in good condition. And that will clean up much better too. So you can see I've laid things out in the order they came off. As simple as it may look, taking it apart, it's amazing how things you can go either way when you put them back on, and if you throw them all in a container, your mind will just play tricks on you and you'll probably end up with a different looking lamp. But it's important to put them together the same way because they will kind of lock together nice and tightly when you're assembling them. Now you can see that they all thread onto this threaded pipe, and it's come loose this end. So we can fit our new fitting to that first and then thread it back together. But I'll take this opportunity to clean up all the metal parts. You can see how spongy that one is. But they'll all clean up fine. I'll take a photo of the order of them so that then I can just put them all in the sink, give them a good scrub up, and I'll have a reference point to put them back in the right order. This cord I won't keep. It can just go in the scrap bin for the insulated copper wire, which is paying really well at the moment. And the plug, I've got a container to put the plugs in because they do have brass on them. Now this one, if I bring it back here, you'll notice it did have an earth pin, even though it's a 2-core wire, so it doesn't run an earth to the lamp. It's really only just for stability when it's in the power point. This more modern cord I've got is still a 2-core cord, and it doesn't actually have an earth pin. It's perfectly fine to use. You don't need an earth on a lamp that isn't made out of total metal. The general rule of thumb is if you're repairing a lamp and it did have an earth, make sure you put one on. If it didn't have one from factory, then it's not required. Now just a trick with rusted metal things, if you're cleaning up stuff that's chromed, quite often a fine steel wool, the finer the better, will actually remove a lot of the rust, and the chrome usually stays and it brightens the whole thing up. Now this, I don't know, is a really good chrome job. Sometimes you can get brass plated items, and this the steel wool will actually take some of the brass plating off, so you do have to be a bit careful. This one I think will clean it up fine. So what I'm going to do is I'll give it a scrub right over. It's still going to look a bit rusted, but at least we'll get away from the orange rust look. And then I'll just give it a quick spray of clear lacquer just to stop it rusting anymore. I don't mind having plating loss and a bit of rust staining on a vintage item, because you know, I like them to look old. I don't like it to look like it's just been purchased brand new and it's a reproduction. So a bit of wear and tear and a bit of rust and plating loss kind of adds to its appeal. But I do want to get rid of the fresh orangey look of rust. And you can see there that the steel wool, it just gives it a bit of an overall metal kind of colour, and we've still got most of the plating. It didn't remove any of that. So before I assemble it, I will actually give this just a quick spray with a clear lacquer to stop it rusting any further. And I'll do the same to all the other pieces as well. This one particularly will benefit, if we can get that to focus. It's possibly brass. I didn't try it with a magnet. It does look brass, but then again, well, it won't be because it's got a rust on it. So this should clean that rust off pretty well, and it shouldn't take the brass plating off. And you can see that that's already, I'll just rinse it a bit and have a look. That's actually cleaned it up quite a bit. So it doesn't totally remove the corrosion as you'd expect, but it just reduces the severity of it. And in my opinion, it actually gives it quite a nice patina. So I like to use the soapy steel wool pads. I think they just help remove any oily deposits as well. And there we go. I think that looks quite a lot better. A bit shinier. And underneath will be alright because we won't see that. And the last piece to clean is this piece. You can see it's really gathered a lot of dust and grime over the years. So we'll wash that out. It's pretty good on the outside. Those little spots will just about disappear with the steel wool. And we're not going to use that hole anymore, but it won't matter being there. You won't notice it once the lamp's assembled. Well, I couldn't get all the rust out. It's obviously been quite damp and corroded through the plating in there quite more severely, but it won't matter, you won't really see that. And as you can see from the outside, it actually came up really good. Took a lot of little rust specks off it, and it's got a nice vintage patina, so that will go back together nicely. I probably won't even worry about spraying this with the clear lacquer. It was really that rusted base piece that was likely to look a bit average if we didn't spray it, but this will be fine. So we'll leave this for tonight. These ones can dry, and I've clamped, this looks rather complicated, but all I'm doing is I've just glued that foil sticker down, one side had lifted, so I put a little bit of super glue, and I've used an aluminium heatsink there with a really nice flat side on it, and I've just clamped it up there, not super tight, but just to hold the sticker nice and flat while it sets. It's part of the lamp's history, and it shows that it's Italian made, and it shows that that piece is real marble, so we don't like to remove original stickers. Everything else is right to assemble tomorrow. Now I took this sleeve off, and we will use this sleeve in the new piece of wire. It does fit through it, and that's an important extra layer of insulation. Because there's no earth wire on this lamp, we do need to be careful that the bottom part doesn't rub through into the live wire. So that extra layer of insulation is important to include. I've taken off the old fitting, and I found just a plain modern fitting. It's not switched, and it's the same thread on the end. Most of them are a standard thread, although I noticed this one's got a little reducer on there, but that does screw in fine. Now we can't assemble any of this until the base is ready to go, and these other two bits are ready to go, because we need to thread them all onto the wire in their right order, including this little retaining nut, and then slide the wire up through the tube, and then we can wire up the fitting. And if you don't get them in the right order, you're going to have to unwire it from this fitting and redo them. But if you just put the wire straight into the fitting, obviously you can't get all the bits on because the cord has a switch in it and the plug the other end. So you need to thread them all through like a string of beads, and then wire it up, and then slide everything up and fit it together. And then this last retaining nut will slide up and tighten it all so that it's all rigid and not wobbly. So there we go. We'll assemble it tomorrow and give it a test. Our lamp's all ready to assemble now. The sticker glued down pretty well, and it shouldn't come off now, so that's good. Our painted pieces, or that one and this one, when I say painted, we just lacquered them, they're fine. So we're right to start assembling. So we'll start by feeding the wire through from the outer hole, and then we're going to pull it all through here. We don't have a lot to play with because the switch isn't actually that far down the wire. So we'll pull that up tight there. Now the next one is the little nut. So if we feed that through the right direction, and that can sit in there. Now the wire can poke down the hole. Pull that through. We don't have a lot to work with, as I said, but hopefully we can get it all on. So the next piece is the long rod that everything feeds onto, and we need to get this extra layer of insulation in there. So we'll put that on first, because it's got a bit of a kink, that end where it folded around at the bottom, and we'll be using that end the same. So we've got to slide this through. It's pretty firm, and then we'll slide the other sleeve over the top of it. That's got it right through. It took a bit to get there, but we got there. So now this other, the main support sleeve, we'll slide over that, and we can poke that down through there. We won't do the nut up yet. We'll still leave ourselves a bit of working space. So as you can see, that's ready to do up tight once we get everything else on. So now we have some sort of framework to put the rest of the stuff on, and we'll start with this bottom piece that we clear lacquered, and we do need to take this little reducer thing off. and that will allow everything else to slide on. These are going to be a different, depending on what lamp you're doing. Sometimes you might have to put all these pieces on first and slide the rod through, but this is, now that we've got that reducer off, they'll slide on. So basically reverse of the dismantling process, and if you need to, you can consult your photo and get them in the right order. And I have a feeling that actually went the other way. I better check the photo. It did go that way, so it just shows you how easy it is for your memory to fade on these. And it's, I guess you could lay them out. If you took them apart and studied them, you could use it as a memory test, but you know, why bother? We've got a photo to refer to. We've also got the original video footage. So all right, that's all back on. The next piece is this frame, but I'm starting to run out of length here, and it is poking through a bit further than it needs to. So what I'm going to do now is to start the nut on that thread and get 2 or 3 threads on it, so it's going to be secure. And then I can pull this up tight this end, and we'll put these last few fittings on, and then we can put our light fitting on and tighten it all up. So we'll get the nut started on here, and we've got it on a fair few threads to hold it, so we don't want to do that up too much or we'll run out of room on our thread the other end. So now that that's tight, we can let that push through. I'll still leave this loop here for now, because we'll need to get a little bit more wire through to wire it up. But with that tight, we can now finish assembling the top. So we have this big frame next, the support for the shade, and then last of all is the support for the chimney. So we've got enough thread poking through in the top, as you can see there. So now I've threaded the base of the light fitting, and you can see I've screwed that brass bush into that already, and that will now screw down tight onto that thread at the bottom, and we can tighten up the nut at the base to secure all the body of the lamp. And that did up nice and firm, and everything seems to be fitting snugly together, and it's not loose. So I didn't have to touch that nut, I just basically turned that plastic light fitting until it pulled everything up tight. We can, if we want to get a little bit of extra tightness, we can do that nut up a little bit at the end, but you don't want to do it too tight because you'll end up stripping thread somewhere. And remember that that nut isn't a real nut, it's just basically pressed, like a pressed tin version. So now we've got to do the wiring, and we've got enough wiring sticking through, and I've peeled back the sheath a little bit to give me a bit of room to move, and I've stripped the ends of the wire, and then I've given them a twist with my fingers so that there's no loose copper strands anywhere. So now we need to wire it into the socket itself, and you'll notice on the socket it's got a couple of hooks on either side, one on either side, and that's so that when you put the wire in, you can then run it round underneath the hook, and that allows for some protection. If the cord happens to get a tug, it won't actually pull the wire out of the terminal and potentially short on some metal. So those hooks are important, and just about every plug or socket or light fitting does have some way of restraining the wire, just to help if there is a bit of trauma on the cord. Not so important in a lamp, of course, because it has a bend at the bottom, so you'd never pull the wires through anyway. Okay, now before we put them in the terminals, the best thing to do with these wires is, as I said, make sure they're twisted up nice and tight. Then put your thumbnail in the middle and fold it. So we've got double thickness to do the screw up on. Do the same with the other side. So when you're stripping the wire, you'll need to allow for that. So then nice and neat and double thickness. And we can feed these both into the terminals now. And they should fit snugly in with no exposed wires. We'll do the screws up. And you just want to do them firm plus a little bit. You don't want to do them super tight, because what will happen is that the screw will actually start to shear strands of wire, and you could potentially cut the wire right in half if you did them up tight enough. So we want a nice solid connection, but we don't want any risk of it breaking. So they're both quite firm. So now we just need to loop the wire, one around that hook as such, and one around this side. Little fiddly, if you didn't leave yourself enough room, you might have to strip a little bit more of the outer sheath back, but that will be fine. That will be nice and secure, and now we're ready to pull the wire from the other end to fit this fitting snugly in that housing. So we did have enough wire, and the other thing is we've got that extra insulation we don't want to slide out the other end. So I've pulled the wire through and that fitting is seated, and they usually have some sort of locator so it sits nice and flush. Now that that's in, we can just put the top cap on and screw that up tight to hold all the light assembly together. Beautiful. So that end's finished. This end we can see that the insulation did pull through a little bit. We should be able to push it back up the stem. But the critical part for this is where it folds over the edge of that steel piece, and that will be fine there. That will protect it well. So now we can pull the excess cord back through the side hole, and we'll just help it through there. Nice and snug, nice and safe. The extra insulation there is doing its job nicely, and the switch ended up a nice distance away from the base. So let's put the shades on and see how it looks. So I straightened the frame a little bit. All I did was just lean it on it one side, and it just bends these rods a fraction. It seems pretty square now. I only found an old version, old incandescent light globe. It's a 60 watt. Normally I'd probably only run a 40 watt in a lamp. You do have to be careful of the heat generated by these things. But this will do for a test. And we'll put our chimney on, which fits snugly in there. And then our decorative shade over the top. And that fits pretty good in there. And there we go. Quite a nice looking lamp. We better plug it in. And the moment of truth. Well, there we go. There you go. That's salvaged a lamp which had some issues. It probably would have worked, but we've now turned it into quite a pretty retro sort of vintage marble based Italian lamp. And I don't know how well this shade's coming up in the camera. It's quite bright. As I said, I would have normally not used a 60 watt globe in there, but I think it looks pretty good. It's safe. We've got a new cord with a switch which works beautifully, and we can put it in the shop now. And look, now that I know it's safe and it looks good and it's not damaged in any other way, I'm going to put $50 on that. Well worth our time just mucking around. And the old cord went in the scrap bin. This switch, I'll probably just keep the top collar. I don't think it's worth keeping the switch. Maybe the bottom collar. Sometimes I'm looking for parts for these. But there you go. Hope you enjoyed that little video. It's all about value adding. It's about saving stuff from being thrown out. And I'm sure this one will find a loving home in a retro house somewhere. Thank you for watching. We'll catch you in the next video.